Welcome, my friends. Thank you for joining us. Got a Melanie here.
Hello, hello. Great. Well, John, thank you so much for being here today. I like your shirt.
Thank you very much.
Start where you are.
Very
Is there
important.
anything you would like to say about that before we jump
Sure.
in?
My most common gripe and appreciation of this statement, because of course you can only ever be where you are, is that we tend to try to act from where we want to be instead of where we are. And so the activity always ends up being conceptual, ends up being obstructed by our own ideas. And so the famous mistranslation from the Tao Te Ching, which is the long journey begins with the first step, which very much leans into what we love, at least in the culture that you and I grew up in, which is activity, doing it, getting it done, make it happen, achieve that goal, be number one. And the difficulty with that is the actual translation is something much closer to the long journey begins under your feet. Xiaozu, beneath your feet, where you are. And that difference is so profound that it's a complete different way of looking at yourself, at the world, at how we are in the world, that to me it's emblematic of the common misunderstandings in Taoism. And so just as an important reminder to always begin where you are, to me is very important, which is why everyone should go on my channel and buy this shirt. $15.99. I have no idea how much they cost. But I think that it's something that can be constantly returned to. The present moment can constantly be returned to, but also as a practice. If we begin always by reminding ourselves to be where we are, to don't, as Shefu would say, then I think that always leads to better ends.
Wonderful. And I feel like that is a really great point to lead with in this discussion, starting where we are.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe we could start by acknowledging all of the new videos you've been putting out lately. You started your
Thanks.
channel with a goal to spread a very specific kind of Qigong practice,
Mm-hmm.
snake and turtle. And since then you've expanded into Taiji and sharing your Qin practices with people and sitting meditations. And we've talked a lot on this channel about traditional Chinese medicine and its application to Qigong, and a certain phrase that Shifu uses, the body mind, the body hyphen mind. That's how he phrases it, because the two are one in a Taoist sense. The body mind connection. There we go. And more recently, you've been publishing a lot of videos about, or interviews rather, with peace activists, people who are experts in what we call the nonviolent movement. And so I guess just to start with, how have you found yourself moving in that direction? And what have you been learning? What are some, maybe we can start with a definition of what nonviolence means and what you see its application being to Qigong and this larger body of work that you're publishing.
So first, acknowledging in the year of our Lord 2025, we have nearly 1,000 videos of
Amazing.
lessons uploaded. Yeah. And I remember the moment when I said, okay, my goal is to have 12 videos up for people to respond to. And so really nice to reflect back just on that progress. Thank you for that, especially for people watching this video in the future. And as far as the cultivation of peace and nonviolence, because they're not necessarily the same, maybe we can say that peace is the internal quality that is cultivated from correct practice. Peace is the state of being where the heart mind is quiet, the emotions are settled in an appropriate way, and the body is soft and open. And that experience is peace, even in a turbulent atmosphere, even when the world is a little bit wild around you, you can still be experiencing peace internally. And then the action that is taken from that space, a skillful action taken from that space, we would consider to be nonviolent. And so the cultivation of those skills is a really important one. And so, of course, famously in the world of the martial arts, we have all of these systems built around this idea. So even the term like jujitsu is like, it's the gentle way. It's the way that people are talking about. Judo is the gentle way. Jiu-jitsu is like the technique of gentleness. Aikido is the peaceful way of energy. And it's this constant return to the idea of developing enough skill so that you can be nonviolent. And our instructor's master, Master Feng, would say, Feng Shuya, he would say that if you are attacked and you hurt them in defending yourself, then your skill level isn't high enough yet. Ideally, not just are you able to defend yourself and get out of the situation appropriately without hurting anybody, but maybe you've actually managed to heal them along the way. You've healed the situation. You've created something better from a bad situation. That would be the goal of correct martial arts practice. Although, of course, the movies would have you believe that it means that you reach in and you rip out their spine and hold it up screaming in bloodlust or something. And that's what you see, and that's what's defended in the world. And equally in politics and the larger scale of movements between nations, there's the possibility of actions that arise from this peaceful state, this movement of nonviolence, where everybody at the end is better off from the engagement that you're having rather than worse off. But everything that we see modeled in media and even stories, the stories we have of heroes and things, it's always modeling where somebody wins and somebody loses. And so that in conversation and in interaction with people, we discover that people genuinely believe that's how the world works. That's the only way for the world to work, is that in order for you to win, somebody has to lose. And we see it economically, we see it in board games, we see it in everything. We see it with kids interacting because that's all they know. And we never take the time to learn that maybe there's a better way. And so a huge reason for all of these videos that I've been putting out, talking with experts about peace and nonviolence, peace work, is so that people can understand that there is a better way. And small sense could be just through meditation, learning how to deal with your distracted mind through softness and gentleness and returning through that, which works better than trying to concentrate by squeezing your mind, which doesn't work. That's the smallest, most intimate possible interaction of that experience. And then, of course, in the larger scale with movements between countries and maybe eventually between planets, that it's possible to interact with the universe in such a way that everybody heals in the process, that the conflict itself is an opportunity to heal, and that as long as we have the skills developed, the techniques, the methods, and the mindset cultivated enough to create the opportunity for that change, then that will always be better. But we have to look for it to know that it's possible. And I feel that it's shockingly shameful that most of us don't even know that it's possible.
I agree. Yeah, very well said. And if I could paraphrase, so it sounds like there's a lot to respond to there. Nonviolence comes from this state of clarity, as you mentioned.
Well, it can. Yeah.
It can come from a state of clarity. And so it makes sense to my mind that Qigong would be a method of cultivating clarity. So the connection there makes sense to me. And you also mentioned that a degree of skill is necessary to be truly nonviolent, regardless of the circumstances. And I've heard Shifu say that acting from that place of clarity is really, really important, because even if, as opposed to acting from a place of tension or internal, turbulence, because even if the action, the decision that you make is the same in both scenarios, acting from clarity or acting from tension, the effects will always be different. The effects of acting from tension will never be appropriate. Even if you win in the short term, and Michael Nagler, I think, has said this as well, long term, there will be unintended consequences. And so that was one of the really big takeaways that I took from your interview recently. And yeah, more and more, I'm really appreciating this idea that we can be nonviolent in all aspects of our lives, not just, in a martial context, which I have never found myself in, fortunately. So how can we begin practicing nonviolence in our daily lives? What does that look like, practically speaking, especially in the way that we speak, listen, and think?
In a practical sense? Well, I think that there's a difference. Well, one of the useful terms that we have is the difference between something that works and something that works, little w, big W. And very often, for instance, if I am interacting with a bully at work, somebody who likes to yell at me or to belittle me or just talk over me in meetings or something like that, whatever the context is. And I want to have the option to speak, or maybe just not to feel so small. And so I explode and yell at this person. Maybe I try to get them fired. Maybe I, depending if it's on Zoom or in person, I throw something at them or, whatever it is. And so it's worked in the sense that now I have the opportunity to speak. And maybe that person is now afraid of me or something, which makes me feel good in the moment. Oh, yes, I am powerful. But it didn't work in the larger context. It's not going to get me what I want. Everything is now going to be worse, both from my own personal experience, because I've strengthened the part of myself that is small and afraid and needs to use aggressiveness to defend myself, which is probably the same problem that coworker had in the first place. And now that interaction is unhealthy. The whole group meetings dynamic is now worse off. So it worked in the short term, but it didn't work in the way that I actually wanted it to. And to recognize the difference, and Michael Nagler has entire chapters in his books about understanding this difference, it's important to try to recognize the need for both. That in the short term, I want to have a change happen, whatever that is. But I also want to keep in mind the larger goals that I have for myself and for the people around me, so that I can find a way that it works in both senses of the word. And that can require skill and practice. And in a recent interview with Rivera's son, wonderful interview if you haven't watched it yet, she talked about a number of the things where the skillful quality is being developed even in kids, that often we think of these things as very difficult. And maybe at the level of finding peace between nations is certainly difficult and complicated, because we've waited so long that now there's all of these complicated knots that have been tied that we have to untie. But she was talking about how if you teach kids in schools at the elementary level and the high school level how to respond to violence, so that what we learn in most schools, in most contexts, at least, again, in the culture that I grew up in, is two kids or a bunch of kids start fighting and wrestling and punching at each other, yelling at each other. And what the media and the context around us often tells us is that what you're supposed to do is circle around and go, fight, 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 or something like that, or you get involved, or you make things worse, or something happens, or you run away. And that the studies are showing that if you just do the smallest amount of education about how to work through that circumstance in a different way, both if you're the ones being bullied or if the fight is getting started and you're feeling those aggressive feelings, what to do with them. I'm feeling afraid. What do I do with these feelings? And if all we know, because all we've ever been taught and our little mammalian instinct kicks up, is to be aggressive or to run away or to, something like that, to surround like a pack of dogs or something. If you know that there's a different way and you've practiced that just a little bit, that the entire relationship of all the students changes, because now there's a different way for those feelings to flow and to move. And now people aren't as afraid as each other. They don't pack up in the same way. The communal situation changes. The relationship with the teachers shifts. everything changes. And in just a few years, the entire social structure of these schools will change. And there's so much data around this that it's worth putting the money into that, because it actually, for the people that care about that kind of thing, you actually save money in the long run. And of course, the entire culture changes. So it both works in the short term, and it works in the larger sense. And of course, now we're talking about eventually these people become adults who learn that there's a better way, and maybe they teach their kids and their friends. And so this better capacity expands through the culture, expands in their own lives. And pretty soon we find something better, but we have to teach it. And as Rivera is trying to share and spread this data, it's just not that difficult. But because we haven't taken the time to do it, because we imagine that the only thing that can be done is to treat kids like they're packs of animals and we have to keep them separated, like with barbed wire. I grew up in schools surrounded by barbed wire. Like, that's just not a way of seeing ourselves and seeing the world that leads to good endings. It may work in the short term, but it doesn't work for anybody else. Does
That's
that answer
right.
the question?
That's right. No, yeah, that was a wonderful answer. And that was a takeaway, what you just said about your interview with Rivera, the power of storytelling and the ways we've been led to believe that violence is the only answer and or that violence is justifiable. And that's a much larger topic, which we can get into, because I do think there's nuance, of course, to everything. But one of the points Rivera made that really resonated is that actually, if you look at a lot of these wars throughout history that we attribute, we say that, so-and-so won because they had the bigger hammer, essentially. She was like, no, actually, if you look, there were a number of nonviolent events leading up to the end of the war that contributed to that success. For better, ideally, right? Because it's a nonviolent movement. And that completely changed how I perceive progress, because not even that long ago, I was reading some articles that suggested, nonviolent movements, peaceful protests, they have a place, they raise awareness, they raise visibility to causes, which is wonderful, but it's usually the more violent forms that really make an impact, and I just really appreciate that there are people like her out there debunking that myth.
Thank you, Rivera.
Yeah, and your practical example in the workplace of having, experiencing tension with coworkers is so relatable. I work in the corporate world, and it's so easy to react to an email or to react to something someone says, in the heat of emotion, and then deeply, deeply regret it because of this weird vibe that's now been created as a result. And there's no end to that. The hot potato just keeps getting passed. I heard John use that expression recently. And yeah, I like the idea of also looking at how we can shape the corporate environment and other work environments to be less violent in that way. Like, why is it that so many people feel so reactive in the workplace? Is it because they're stressed? Is it because their teams are short-staffed and they're trying to manage more than they can handle, and so their bodies start to collapse, and invariably, they end up having a short fuse with other people? Like, it totally makes sense. And so in what ways can we create environments that are healthier for people, that help people become their best selves, And I feel like in my experience, the biggest shift I've experienced from being that violent, reactive person myself to being something a little bit less violent is that learning what your shirt says, like learning to, like, feeling that emotion, like, I really want to say this in response, what they said, they shouldn't have said that, they shouldn't have done that, whatever. And then just going for a walk instead, just giving some space between that reactive state and how I choose to respond. And I know we all know that, right? It's easier said than done. And in fact, this is a question that has come up in more than one meeting that John and I have attended with other people who are interested in learning more about nonviolence is, I try to count to 10 in those moments. I try to settle, but it's still so hard sometimes. And I still end up saying things or doing things that I regret. And so I wonder if you have Any advice for those people? Anything beyond what we've already discussed?
That skill of learning to settle is definitely not easy. And I feel like it's something I was just sending a voicemail about to somebody who was asking this question, that when, for instance, if we're cultivating correctly, then we become people physically, mentally, emotionally who become more stable under pressure. And so the obvious physical example of that is what we use in push hands in Taiji, which is a wonderful testing practice. Our Shifu will say that the proof is in the pushing, which is if your structure is well built, which doesn't necessarily mean strong, although a kind of strength comes out of it, but when it's being pressured, i.e., in this case, somebody pushing on you physically, or just gravity weighing down on you, the more you let go, the more you relax, honestly, and allow your structure to take over, the more stable you become. Which is to say, the more cultivated and in yourself, the more human that you are, even physically, then when pressure comes at you, you become more stable, you become more relaxed, your system becomes more responsive and healthy, rather than freezing and frigid and broken, which we can all agree is not a very useful physical state to be in during times of stress and pressure. And the same can be said about emotional and mental states, that if you are cultivating correctly through meditative practices, through relationship interactions, and these training methods that we make use of, you become somebody that during times of stress becomes more functional. Your mind becomes clear and brighter in those times, rather than bogged down and obsessive and scared and frozen so you can't think. Your emotions don't freeze. Instead, you become very calm and open, and you can experience yourself more clearly. You become more honest with yourself in those moments. You're able to more clearly feel the space around you and relate healthfully. And so the reason I mention this is because the context of that is very important, because when we talk about learning to cultivate these nonviolence skills, very often the way people talk about them is that they, physically, again, if somebody pushes on me, what do? I go, ah. I get in a really big stance and I tighten my muscles and I lean into it and I counterbalance the weight, or maybe I do something really tricky and I slip the weight off of me or something like that. And the mental and emotional versions of those are the same kinds of things, where we're responding by having mental tricks, witty comebacks, or emotional deflection, or distance, or numbness. And we cultivate those skills. We develop really big ego. We have these affirmations to ourselves. No, I am good. These things. And while they may have a useful quality in that moment, the overall cultivation of that is not in a healthful direction. Maybe it works in the short term, but it doesn't work in the larger sense. And so within the Taoist methods, for instance, or the Buddhist training systems, there are lots of these methods that cultivate the appropriate kind of mind-body emotional interaction in the appropriate kind of relationship. So within my relationship with Mel, because of the kind of relationship we've been cultivating, if you don't mind me speaking for both of us,
Go for it.
during times of stress and pressure, we become closer. We become kinder to each other. We don't start snapping at each other, because our relationship isn't built on the kinds of things that cause that interaction. And it's very important to shape our lives in such a way that this quality of resilience and appropriate responsiveness is built in, because the world pressures us. And so if we're training in order to deal with more difficult times, then we want to move in the right direction, not the wrong direction. And so if your training mentally is to try to mentally overcome things by being quick and snappy and smarter than other people, and to be able to control the situation, to manipulate them in the right way, to deal with your emotions by shielding yourself more and more, or by deflecting and becoming less vulnerable, then you're going the wrong direction. And So the skills that we cultivate in peace and nonviolence, they have to reflect that quality. And so if I'm cultivating the ability to go out into the community and help the homeless, for instance, and I'm doing it in a way that I'm shaping my life to feel better about myself. I'm doing it because I feel a little guilty for, I don't know, for kicking a homeless person one day walking by or something like that. Or maybe I feel guilty because I've been hoarding millions of dollars and so I want to do a little bit of something to ease my pain about that. That's not going to work. It may work in the sense that you're doing a thing to help that momentary bad feeling, and maybe I feel a little better in that moment. Look, I did something good. Pat myself on the shoulder. But it doesn't work in the sense that you're cultivating in yourself actual generosity and compassion. You're not actually changing the world in a way that makes things better. And so we have to shape all of our activities, all of our nonviolence efforts on the appropriate context of who we are. We need to constantly be able to start where we are. We need to always be creating a world within which we are supportive of each other to become the better versions of ourselves. And I feel as though, and this is something I'm still so new at, good nonviolent work, not just mediocre nonviolent work, should be pushing us all in the direction where we are the healthier and better versions of ourselves. In the same way that maybe I can clean up a nuclear site, or a mining location. And one of our friends who does amazing work cleaning up old mining areas, where the way they dealt with it after they've destroyed a mountain, for instance, to remove copper, is they literally, this is a thing that happens, they cover the entire mountain in concrete. And they go, good, I'm done. And then slowly all of the poisons that have been released and all the problems slowly filter into the water system and poison and people just upstream. This happens all the time. And so her entire work is to try to heal those sites well enough, not just so that it's not poisoning the people downstream, but maybe plant life can come back in. Maybe it's no longer just a desecrated, site of destruction. And I feel like our efforts in nonviolence have to be like that. They have to be more than just covering the place in concrete and calling it good, and more than just planting a bunch of grass and hoping that it fixes itself. But we have to work on restoring the space, restoring the community, restoring all of the things about that ecosystem that make it a healthy, balanced structure so that it, again, becomes resilient in the way that we become resilient. And I think that requires a lot of forethought and skill. And so by developing these communities who, like Michael and Rivera and these people that are doing this, they spend all their time thinking about how to do this skillfully. And so for beginners like you and I, we go, wow, that sounds really hard. But people have spent generations thinking about this and writing down ideas about how to do this. We're just not making use of those methods. And so it's amazing for me as a beginner to come into this and go, wow, people have really thought about this. People have been studying this for a long time. And to feel in awe. And I have so much gratitude for these people trying to put these things in places so that maybe one day as a people we'll start using these tools. And I am just, I feel like these methods that are available, whether in Taoism or the more broad nonviolence movements at political levels, they have so much to offer us. And all we have to do is implement them.
Very well said. Yeah. No, I remember being shocked when I found out that Michael Nagler founded the first ever peace and conflict studies degree program in the at least in the United States. I would not be surprised if there are many peace and conflict studies courses elsewhere in the world that have been around for a long time. But yeah, this was just in the 70s, 60s or 70s when he founded it. And when John mentioned that to me, I was like, oh yeah, how weird. We have so many resources going into the study of these violent systems, not just, violent defense systems, but, we were touching on the corporate environment, for example, and how corporations can manipulate people enough to extract as much as they can out of them. Like, I would argue that that's a form of violence.
Yeah, for sure.
And we spend so much money thinking about these things, but yeah, at least in the United States, I wonder how much is actually being allocated toward the study of peace, especially given what we know about how much more effective it is for making change.
This action of cultivating peace internally, which is clearly associated with Qigong and meditation work and the things that we do with this channel, they are also clearly associated with this nonviolence work and the ways of expressing peace and cultivation in the world on a larger scale. It's all one movement, it's all one spectrum. And so I feel very happy to be including that in this channel, because you can't have the stuff you do at home and then the things that you do in a larger sense not, be in conflict. It doesn't go well. Yeah, Steph is so kind, asking about advice helping the weight move down through the legs in standing posture. And the example that I'll often use, my little sparkle stick. So the way that people tend to think about moving weight down is we push it down. But that pushing down of something, we'll call it lowering the weight in the body. The way that my sitting on the floor is lowering the weight of my body to the ground. But in standing posture, like you're mentioning, that's not the way to do it. It's more of that settling through. And so I appreciate the way you worded the question, how to help the weight move down through the legs to the ground. And the method, for those who are new to this, it looks like this. If this is the weight in the upper body, if this is the way we're holding ourselves, if I wait, W-A-I-T, then that weightedness flows down through the body when done correctly and settles low. And so how does this happen? It happens because we take the time, we get out of the way, and we allow things to settle on their own. And so the skill then becomes, how do I get out of the way? And first, then we have to figure out what's holding the weight up in the body. Sometimes it's just through volition. I'm going to continue holding my little tool here. Sometimes it's just through me trying to hold the weight up on my body. I'm gritting my teeth, my shoulders are up, and I'm standing here like this, going, eventually I'll relax, because relaxation, letting go, is the goal. But if I can instead learn to go, with practice of course, go, then this process happens on its own. And so if we recognize that we're up here like this and we're hanging on, but sometimes we feel that effect. We feel the tension. It's even worse if you don't feel the tension, then you have a lot of practice to do. First you have to feel it, and then you can start to let go of it. And as you let go of that held process, one layer of it lets go. And the direction that letting go happens is outward, away from the center, through the limbs, and then down, if you're letting go appropriately rather than collapsing. And you let some of that weight fall through into the ground, out of your body. And that's one layer. And of course, we peel those layers back eternally, as far as I can tell. There's no end to how soft and open and alive and present you can be. And so always letting go. And the nice thing is that as you let go, your body opens and you are making space inside. You make space in your mind as your awareness opens. You make space in your emotional system. In the United States, at least, we say the heart when we're talking about the emotions. And the heart opens. And so now you have space for better feelings, more vulnerability. And in the body, as the body opens, you have more space for movement. And in that space, the weight falls through. And you keep letting it go. Maybe it falls to your belly, maybe it falls to your thighs. And you keep letting go, and there's no end to that. Eventually it goes down. Steph quotes, "How do I do it?"
You don't.
You don't. That's what she wrote. That's
Great
it.
quote.
It is the great quote stole from Master Zhecheng. We're all just stealing from Master Zhecheng. And this process of letting go is a thing that you can't do. You can only don't. You have to let go, make space. And that's the reason why standing posture is so powerful, because it's so easy. I mean, easy in the sense of being simple. You're just standing there. And in that space of letting go and letting go of feeling safe, hopefully, feeling comfortable, hopefully. And then your body goes, oh, 1%. And then it goes out and down and floats down through, settling, hopefully out of your body into the ground. And never push it too far, or the weight comes back up again. The mind comes back up again. And then later on, you come back and do it again, and then 1% drops away, or 0.1 of 1%. And that's the way. And it's certainly not complicated any more than, again, me taking the weight of that person pushing really hard on me and I don't move is complicated. It doesn't feel like anything. Your body does it for you. And it's only a matter of waiting, W-A-I-T, until the weight, W-E-I-G-H-T, falls through into the ground. And I think that's the beauty of it in so many ways, is there's no complexity to it. We can end up talking about it forever and describing it in 1,000 different metaphors. It's the same with the mind growing quiet, or at least settling. And of course, it's more difficult for some people than others. Seek out professional therapy if your mind is especially toxic and active. There are people out there who can help. But for most people, their bodies, their emotions, their minds, as you do these practices, slowly go, and it passes a threshold where suddenly you can't feel weight in your body anymore, and your body opens. And emotionally, you settle and become open enough so that your emotions release and expand. Your mind gets quiet enough so that your mind becomes light and open. And it's nothing to do with special skills. This is the way that we're designed. This is the way that we're built. Made, evolved. And I feel as though some of the difficulty in conversations like this is that it makes it sound complicated. But really, it's the least complicated thing in the world, because we're returning to what we actually are. And this relates to peace and nonviolence in the same way that famously in the Confucian tradition, there's writers who will talk about how humans are born good. That if there is a child wandering into the street doing something dangerous, another slightly more aware and aged child will rush over and save them. Every person will do this unless there's something seriously wrong with them. It's just part of our nature to be loving and kind and open. It's only that we put layers of these illnesses onto ourselves, and it starts to cover up those instincts of community and helpfulness, of selflessness. And so all we're doing is restoring this more natural human quality. And so in a way, you can think of these acts of nonviolence, these skills of standing and Qigong, which are all the same, as a very quiet restoration of our most human qualities.
Yeah, so I was going to ask about I don't know if inner alchemy is the right term to describe the transformation of really strong emotions that we might call like poisons or toxins, and through a Taoist lens, into something more healing. And one of the things that I found really fascinating from a recent talk by Michael Nagler again was how angry he says Gandhi actually was. And this is Michael Nagler again, for those just hearing. He studied nonviolent movements for decades as a professor, including the work of Gandhi. And so it was really surprising to hear him say this. And of course, it's something I think we can all relate to. And yeah, do you want to share what Michael said about how Gandhi transformed that anger?
Yeah, and some of the most famous quotes that come from him are that he felt as though he was the most angry human alive. And that, of course, was something he was working with, because we're all working with our human qualities. Anger is something certainly that I had to deal with a lot as well. Stemming from my fear, anger was more comfortable to feel. And one way of thinking about internal alchemy and this internal transformation that we do using these same methods, again, to connect our internal methods of meditation and Qigong with the broader movements in the world, is to recognize, let's just use this word qi, this energy in the body, although it's not a great translation of qi, but let's just say that we take this energy that's being expressed in the body, and when it is moving strongly in us, anger is something that breaks through blockages. There's this movement, and when we feel closed and stifled, our experience of that is anger. And when it's small, it's frustration. If it's directed inside, maybe we experience guilt or shame. But when it rushes upward and outward, usually from this protective instinct, there's this movement to explode outward. It's huge energy. And when expressed in ways that are harmful, again, this is a way of defining the term. I'm defining my terms for anger. When that energy is expressed in a way that is harmful to us and the world around us, it's explosive, it damages our body, which in Chinese medicine, we would say that anger is the most damaging of the emotional expressions, that it never leaves anything good behind. It injures our relationships, it shapes the world in a negative way. And so that's one way of defining anger. That same energy, that same qi, that movement through us designed to protect or make a big change in the world, it goes, whoa, it's huge and powerful, kind of surges up and out. We can feel that. When it is channeled instead in a skillful way, in a healthful way, so that it actually nourishes our body, it can still be exhausting the way any kind of big energetic expression can be, but it's being used to make an important change in the world. And when that is expressed healthfully, we often refer to that as an act of love, an act of being courageous. This kind of virtuous, explosive aid. You know, that famous thing of that kid, again, wandering into the street. You look, there's the car, there's the child, and this incredible surge of energy washes through you. We've all experienced something like this in some smaller way, hopefully. And you find yourself stronger and faster than you've ever been, even if you're somebody with aches and pains. You don't feel them. And you have the energy to rush over there, throw yourself in front of this kid, and hopefully rescue them in time in this image. And that's the same energy that we experience as in anger or rage or guilt or shame, except that it's expressed in a healthful way. And so oftentimes it's the way that we express it, but it's the way that we're channeling it. And so when that energy is channeled through love, compassion, through insight, then not only is it not harmful to us because it's appropriate, but it's also helpful in the world. And when it is usually expressed as anger, usually instead it goes through some filter of resentment, of desire, of need, of control, of these maybe unsavory feelings. My desire to hurt somebody, or to protect my space because I feel scared, or something like that. That quality is something that's damaging to us. And then when we act upon those feelings, that big energy rushes out, explodes out of us, usually in an unhealthful way, and then we use it to damage the world around us. That's how we're defining anger in this case. And that same energy could be made use of in ways that are more beneficial to you and more beneficial to the world. And again, in the way that energy of rushing over to save the child, maybe I hurt my knee along the way. Maybe I'm partially hit by the car as I save this child. Maybe, in the very least, I'm just exhausted afterward. So you could say that that's not something that's expressed for the purposes of health, but it's still an important expression. And in that same way, we have to make sure that this kind of expression isn't happening all the time. It's one of those things that should happen, hopefully, in your life rarely, and it becomes a story later. You have time to recover in between. You had that energy there when you needed it, and now that moment is gone. Of course, for some people who live in really bad situations, they're constantly having to engage that fight or flight, that side of their nature of, I'm trying to now rescue my family time and time again. But part of the reason to explore peace and nonviolent work is to help keep that from happening to those people again in the future. Because that cycle of humanity keeps happening over and over again, that right now in the world, whenever it is that you're listening to this, there's likely huge groups of people experiencing that for no good reason. It's just that that's what we're doing as people, and it could absolutely stop. And so recognizing that and then just deciding to do what it takes to keep that from happening again, that's the nonviolent movement, this peace activism that we're doing. And then just doing whatever we can to keep it, to stop that cycle that keeps happening in humanity for who knows how long. And part of that cultivation starts inside. So returning to the question about internal alchemy, that recognizing that we have these energies inside us. One, we want to have the resources to be able to act when we need to in order to rescue that child. But then also, when we find that that is constantly happening to us, we're constantly angry, we're constantly frustrated, to recognize how that chi movement is working in our body, and then to make those changes so that that energy is actually being stored as vitality instead of constantly making us feel terrible. Because I know plenty of people, and I have lived in such a way where you are angry every moment of every day, or frustrated, or ashamed, and feeling deeply guilty. And those qualities are not healthy for you, and they don't lead to good actions in the world. And so if I phrase it in terms of psychological values, and we have wonderful therapists and healers for that part of our world, then there are ways that you can act and therapies that you can do that will transform those qualities of your mind so that instead of that being channeled as anger, instead it turns into compassion, either self-compassion or love, generosity, creativity, this quality of humaneness that can be developed. Same energy, same exact chi in Chinese medicine and in these internal layers. And more difficult to describe is that the physical aspect of that energy can also be diverted, used for other things, healed. Those channels can be opened. Those emotions can be expressed differently. And so, of course, obviously internal things are harder to talk about than external things. But these are the qualities that we're developing. So you become a creature of peace and vitality, of health and love and clarity. Not just someone doing those things when you're practicing. I really got to try to be clear. That's not how that works. You develop into a creature that functions differently, more naturally for humanity, and then that gets expressed out in the world very differently. And so the internal alchemical method is just a small scale, harder to see process, but you can see it everywhere in the world around us. And we want to make those changes at all levels. External alchemy, maybe we can say.
Well said. Yeah, and I acknowledge that the internal side of this is a little more complex and probably requires more time to talk about than we have here. And that was kind of the heart of the question, is how can we transform those strong emotions in the moment when we don't necessarily have years of Qigong experience behind our belt? Is it just, choosing not to react, period, maybe going for a walk instead? What would you say for people who can't do that, though, who can't get up and walk away and they have to just do their best? What does that look like?
It's a great question. And so first, and this is actually a question I got this morning from somebody that we know about how to deal with those feelings. And this person, he was being very wise. He tends to be a very angry person, and he's learned about himself over the decades that he responds badly when he's feeling angry and frustrated. And so he's just been not responding, which I just want to, raise my hands and cheer, because that's a huge first step to go, okay, when feeling this way, equals walk away. Don't write that email. Don't make the phone call. Don't send the text. Put them all away. If you're not sure that you can do that, ask for your friends and say, hey, can you keep my computer away from me for a day until I'm more calm? Knowing that you're going to cause yourself problems. And there's actually apps and things that you can download that will force you to take a pause once reading an email. And in places in the States, if you're going to buy a gun, there's a waiting period, because what if you're buying a gun because you're really angry? And it's just, I don't know how long it is, 24 hours. I don't own a gun. But they force you to wait in case you are only buying it because you're mad and you want to walk back and shoot somebody. And I think it's very wise. It forces this little buffer period emotionally, because we recognize that humans are like this. We do the stupid thing. And so it forces people basically to stop and count to 10 before they get a weapon. And we can do that to ourselves at the level of emails and in communication, those kinds of things. In relationships. So for instance, with Melanie and I, she recognizes that for me, that if a complicated mental or emotional situation is occurring, the way that I respond to it is I get really quiet. That's how I process. I stop talking. I kind of become very closed because I'm processing inside. And so what did we do? We talked about it. And we say, hey, I just want you to know that when I am responding this way, it is not because I'm angry. I'm not giving you the cold shoulder, those kinds of things. That's not how I feel. This is just how I process. And for other people, it's the same thing, that if you can communicate ahead of time to the people that love you, maybe you say, hey, when I'm feeling X, when I tend to get frustrated, I start snapping at the people around me. And maybe you can reach out to your friends and say, just so you know, I love you. Ideally when you're feeling well, you say, hey, just so you know, I love you and I want our relationship to go well. And when I start snapping at you, it is not anything about you. And you apologize ahead of time and you let them know. And maybe you work out a deal. When I apologize for doing this to you later, where can I buy you lunch? And so it's talked about, it's expressed, they have time to prepare emotionally, so it's not out of the blue that suddenly you're snapping at them, they don't know why, they don't know how to deal with it, and then you have to try to explain after the fact. And so for people that deal with this kind of thing, there's ways for you to prepare the world around you so that your natural reactions don't have the same negative side effects. And internally, you can cultivate, again, using these meditative methods, these internal alchemical skills, Qigong, Taiji practice, the ability to become somebody who is more calm, so you're less reactive, very important. And ideally, along the way, you learn that skill of self-reflection, to pause before you say something, to respond rather than react. And that is a very difficult skill, I think, for people to learn. They develop a little bit of space, usually, ideally, before they start acting really badly. They start to get upset and they go, I don't feel good. Oh, I must be getting upset. That's when they take the breath. That's when, in the very least, they get a little bit of awareness of their emotional structure, enough to go, maybe I'm going to not say everything I'm thinking right now. And they walk away, or they just stop talking, or they even tell the people that they're with, hey, I need to stop talking right now because I'm feeling irritated. You don't even have to know why. It doesn't have to be because of anything. Maybe it's a rough menstrual time. Maybe your meds aren't working as well as they used to. And you just let them know, hey, not feeling great. Gonna stop talking, stop texting for a little while because I don't really trust myself to be kind in the way that I want to be kind. And I think these little interventions are wonderful ways to shape nonviolence and peace into our world until we can get them inside and we become people that either find that distance to not respond when we're feeling, to not react when we're feeling upset, and we can respond appropriately. And then with enough practice, we become people that don't want to react that way. And it doesn't happen that way. Instead, compassion becomes the response. Again, we become people that in those times of stress, we become more kind and more clear, more relaxed rather than the opposite. Entirely possible, take some practice, but these methods are there for that. And again, like studying nonviolence, these strategies and methods are available. We just have to make use of them, and to make use of them appropriately. And so I think that the ability to develop that spaciousness in the lives so that we don't become people who react. We can do it preventatively by talking with people. preventatively by practicing regularly and practicing how we'd like to respond, and then practicing stillness and peace to develop that space between our emotions and our reactions, and then preventatively by healing our internal chi state, we would say, so that we become less likely to have explosive or stuck emotions, which cause these kinds of problems in the first place. We can heal. And in the moment, of course, it's harder. And so in the same way that you wouldn't wait to practice martial arts until you're in the worst possible situation on the street, ideally you'd practice beforehand and develop the skills to defend and keep yourself safe and hopefully keep them safe later. Ideally, emotionally, mentally, communicatively within your relationships, you develop those skills and you rehearse those situations while it's easy. And then when things get difficult, it's already set up. You've already done the practice and life becomes much easier. We want to do that in the inside, we want to do it in our relationship, and then we want to do it in our larger communities. This is what Michael Nagler refers to as the three harmonies. We want all three of those qualities to be well practiced, well rehearsed, and to have things set up so that life itself becomes smoother and we don't have to always be in reaction mode. It just takes a little bit of work, a little bit of strategizing, and it's incredibly effective. And I think that might be the end of the questions. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate you.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. We are very fortunate to have such a wonderful community. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy your practice.